May Jesus be praised and onward with Mary. Good and holy day to you all, my dear children, in the sacred hearts of Jesus and Mary, and in the most chaste heart of Saint Joseph. Well, hello again with our morning column, Saints and Coffee. Today's Monday, the 25th of November, exactly 1 month until Christmas, so we can slowly start preparing our hearts, setting off on a spiritual journey of faith towards the manger in Bethlehem. Far more than this, the world continues to reject Jesus Christ, continues to spurn him. There's no place for him. So today, the 25th of November, is exactly 1 month from the 25th of December, which is the Lord's Christmas. Let's begin slowly to prepare our hearts. The Church celebrates this feast today in the traditional calendar and optionally in the new rite for St. Catherine. A glorious martyr, a young Egyptian martyr who lived in Alexandria, who was able to face the philosophers of her time, and in the face of whose wisdom her detractors felt only a sense of profound frustration, so much so that they condemned her to death. Tradition has it that after her decapitation, after passing through various trials, the body of St. Catherine of Alexandria was transported by angels. A heavenly translation. I don't know if you believe it, I do. But since we live in an age where the supernatural is practically forgotten, tradition has it, as will happen later with the Holy House of Loreto, that her body was translated by angels. So it's a heavenly translation from Alexandria to Mount Sinai on the Sinai Peninsula. At the mountain base, where Moses got the law tablets. Even today there, I don't know how many of you have been there. I have been. I was a young priest in 2000, exactly during the Jubilee of 2000. I went right there to Sinai, to Mount Sinai, at the foot of the mountain, where, according to tradition, Moses received the tablets of the law. There's this monastery of St. Catherine of Alexandria, run by the fathers, by the Orthodox monks, with the tomb of the saint who was transported there by holy angels. So a truly beautiful story, the angelic translation. We must always think of the angels. Then, I haven't said this in a while, but I remind you that Monday is dedicated to Saint Michael the Archangel, whom we must invoke. The angels are with us, the angels visit us, the angels accompany us. Even when we get in the car, we must pray. In any undertaking, pray to the angel. Speaking of cars, as you can see, I'm on my way back from the north of France. We set off in good time, of course, at a pace you can imagine, because we need to get back to Italy. We need to get back to Italy because we have some important engagements there. But first, I'd like to thank the Madonna again for what happened yesterday in Reims. Or as I was told the French say it, or anyway, in Reims. Where some signal problem, so where we experienced a moment of grace, it's true, with few faithful. But here are the images we were already commenting on last night in the Father Answers section, which you can find available on Radio's Play if you couldn't follow it, because it's very interesting. The questions and things that were addressed. You see, there's this family. For those who didn't follow the segment last night, it's a French family. Heathen, you might say. Far from those who couldn't care less what Bergoglio says, proselytizing fanaticism, but let him say what he wants. That man speaks for the devil. Let them listen. Let them go to Mass and communion with the devil. Then they'll see. We preach the gospel. How wonderful this is, to proclaim the gospel, because otherwise we become insensitive, empty. And so yesterday, to our great joy, all these children you see were baptized, a whole family, except for the wife, who was already baptized, originally Belgian, the husband, originally Spanish but French in all but name, and those are the 4 children you see. They were baptized, confirmed, and received their first communion. Don't you find that amazing? In French territory, in a season like the Bergogliana one, where you mustn't push the baptism. Baptism, that's the devil. How mustn't you push the baptism? But I do it, of course I do it, of course I do it, to push the faithful, that even the men and women of our time who haven't known Jesus and met him. In this sense, I also thank Raul, who acted as a catechist for this family. And then I must also tell you, to be completely honest, that this couple, Kenny and Corin, weren't even married, so they were united in marriage, and this experience of Grace, that little girl, as you can see, we were able to ask the parents if they allowed us to show her presence. They said yes, obviously, so we wouldn't have done anything without their permission. A moment of grace, those are the daughters, one a little older, the other a teenager. Then there's the boy you see a little to the side, but very lively. His name is Juan. And then there's Antonia, and then Maria. Here's Maria, as the Frenchman Mayan said, and it was a moment of grace, and we blessed the baptismal water with the holy chrism oils, the oils of the catechumens, which we have kept for some time, and which we obtained from a bishop, a rather reluctant bishop, I might add. Well, these were the moments of grace we experienced yesterday. There weren't many people, not a huge crowd, I'd say quite few, but it was worthwhile to have celebrated the sacraments of Christian initiation and marriage. And today we're leaving France. We're already on our way, aware that we've brought God's grace, not in communion with the impostor, and not on behalf of the false church of darkness, because in the end, my dear flowers, I haven't been believed. From the world of priests, they know I'm right. That's why they're coming after me, pretending I either don't exist, or when I do, it's only to crucify me. Everyone knows I speak the truth. Tightening up, in the end, what needed doing was this: not celebrating Mass in union with the false Pope Bergoglio, and not joining the false church of Satan's darkness. Patience. They wouldn't believe me. Thankfully, there are those who did believe, and so we move forward together. I was telling you I'm back in Italy, though we're still a long way off, but we're getting ready for the next stages. First of all, remember that this week is a week in which we begin the novena to the Immaculate Madonna. It's actually Maria who will prepare us for the Lord's Holy Christmas, because Our Lady, with her yes, allowed God to become flesh. And so the Church, which is a mother, invites us to look to Our Lady so that she may introduce us during the liturgical season of Advent, which begins next Sunday. Friday marks the start of the novena, and this week is a busy one before the big celebration we'll be holding the following week in Milan on the 8th of December, which we'll come back to now. Let me remind you of the dates. The day after tomorrow, Wednesday, the 27th of December, the Feast of Our Lady of the Miraculous Medal at 4:30 in the afternoon. Wednesday after next, we're in Genoa at the Holiday Inn Genoa City, IHG Hotel, meeting in Genoa via Milano 47 with the faithful of the small Ligurian remainder of Torni. Here's the first appointment of the week. Thursday, 28th November, we're in Turin at the Pacific Hotel Fortino, where we've always met, at 36 Fortino Road, not far at all from the Basilica where St. John Bosco's remains lie. We'll meet the faithful remnant there also at 4:30. The program's the same everywhere, except Fridays, as I'll explain, at 3:30. Wednesday and Thursday, the Rosary, concentration on Our Lady, Holy Mass, a moment of Eucharistic adoration, and confessions where possible. Instead, the novena to the Immaculate Madonna begins on Friday, as I was saying. So let's start in Bologna. In Bologna, we'll be at the Zola Perdosa Hotel, the Continental Urban Art, at 16:30. And there, besides Rosario, we sing the novena to Our Lady. Or, however, do something that allows us to remember that it's the novena of the Immaculate Conception. Saturday, November 30th. We'll be in Trento at the Sporting Hotel in Trento at 16:30 for the second day of November. Finally, on Sunday, the 1st of December, we're in Palmanova Udine at the San Marco Auditorium on Via Scamozzi. for Julian delicacies for the third day of the novena, and to celebrate the first Sunday of Advent. So, a busy week: Wednesday Genoa, Thursday Turin, Friday Bologna, Saturday Trento, Sunday Udine. This, after we're coming back from a nice rest period. As someone pointed out last night, you're letting yourselves be massacred. Maybe that's exactly it, but so be it. God's will be done. And I remind you of this appointment, as I said, on the 8th of December in Milan. Coaches are being organized. Check with the secretaries between 10:30 and 12:30. In Assago, we'll have Christmas confessions, then meet at 2:30. Let's begin this moment of faith and prayer with the welcoming of the statue of Our Lady, the Rosary, the consecration, the floral tribute, and the blessing of the families. But here I have to give you one, because I reflect on things and let myself be provoked by what I'm experiencing. Yesterday we were here in France. I'll be back in a moment, and today's window, but I'm giving you a sneak peek to tell you about a new thing I've thought of adding. I hope you like it. Yesterday we were here in France. France is practically mission territory, like perhaps not even old Vietnam, or Southeast Asia, the African jungles, or the Amazon. France is mission territory. That is to say, here, despite the beautiful Gothic cathedrals from Reims to Chartres to Notre Dame de Paris, which, by the way, also went up in flames, there's urgent need to proclaim Jesus Christ, because France is de-Christianized. I remember that a cardinal from the early 20th century in Paris wrote a pastoral letter that caused such a stir. We're talking about the early 20th century after the Enlightenment, the rationalist period, French positivism. And that Cardinal of Paris said that France should be considered a mission field. This is even truer today. France is a pagan land. Look, many come from Christian families. Most of them don't baptize their children anymore. Infant baptism in France. I'm talking about France because I'm still here. And unfortunately, once again, I like it. France is beautiful. I love it. But it's a fact that it's not like things are starting to go differently in Italy now. Infant baptisms have practically disappeared because parents then separate, because here marriage is practically only a tempus. There's the divorce, and then one thinks that the false church promotes all this. It really is the time of the Antichrist. As Brother Celestine said yesterday, the post was in the world, now it's in the church, or anyway in Rome. So then there's no more infant baptism, no more Christian faith, apart from a few exceptions. This futuristic French society, look, it seems almost perfect. French society, the French Republic. It's really present in the area. I'm sorry to say, it's not like down south from Naples, where you wonder where the state is. Got it? Sorry, I wouldn't. It's not my subject. But here you feel the state's presence everywhere. Besides, French nationalism, everywhere there's the French tricolor flag, isn't there? So it's a nation that produces a lot. It's among the richest in the world. Certainly among the world's richest nations. The French living in France, you see it, they feel protected everywhere by the Republic. And so obviously, du des, they change. They couldn't care less about faith. Catholicism is there, but it's a skeleton. It's museum stuff here now. So, yesterday we gave the gospel and the sacraments to this family. And I thought, isn't it time we all announce the gospel together again? I think so. So I thought, giving you this news, that for this Immaculate Conception feast, to families and only to whole families, we will give a gospel. It's symbolic. Taking the gospel everywhere, and unfortunately, the line's breaking up. I apologize, but I couldn't do otherwise. I had to travel today, maybe tomorrow too, we'll see. I was saying, so on Sunday, the 8th of December, along with the floral tribute, it wasn't planned, but my visit to France confirmed this. We'll be giving a gospel to each family because this delivery signifies that we're starting again, as Cardinal Cafe used to say. Cardinal Cafe, come to Milan. I recommend it. It's a moment of grace. There's no need to book. Entry is free. And so you can come. There are coaches organized from various parts of Italy. There's even one coming from Rome. One is already full. So if you intend to write to them, do so in good time by the 30th of November. That means this week, really, if we're to get another coach from Rome to Milan. Here's the news. Naturally, my dear children, I remind you that the opera needs your help. There's no need to repeat it, or actually, yes, perhaps it's necessary to repeat it always. The IBAN, and then perhaps in a slightly simpler way, you can make your payment to Postal Current Account 107 1,776,189. I'll remind you of this week's evening events. You know the rest with the rosaries and all. Tonight at 9 o'clock, there's Don Ramon's Point. We're live, yeah? Director? Right. Sorry, I'll repeat that. The signal's a bit dodgy, but never mind. I was saying that tonight at 9 o'clock, there's Don Ramon's fortnightly column, The Point. What's it about? It's a wide-ranging reflection that Don Ramon constructs around situations in ecclesial life. He freely decides where to focus his thoughts. Share at 9 o'clock on the Radio Domina Nostra YouTube channel, where you're invited to subscribe and give us your likes too. Then, tomorrow evening, which is Tuesday, there's Tuesday's War. We're at the penultimate episode from my republished book, The False Church and Its Destiny, which is always available. You can find it at the meetings we hold around the country, but also by asking the Radio Domina Nostra Secretariat. Tomorrow night's title, the penultimate chapter from my book, is The New Pentecost, True and False Church. This new Pentecost needs a renewed experience of the Holy Spirit descending, like at Pentecost on the apostles, in the form of tongues of fire. And again today, as Montfort said, there's the expectation of a rain of fire, a rain of fire. We'll talk about this, and then tomorrow evening at 9 o'clock, interesting. Wednesday, it's Don Ramon again with the Biblical Wednesday, and Thursday we continue the meditations from my book, The Lamb Symphony, Chapter 6. The Lamb breaks the 7 seals. Very beautiful, this one too, which acts as a pendant to the 5th chapter, when we reflected on God the Father and the Lamb who takes this book and then opens it. So, it's only He who holds the meaning of history. This is a bit ahead of time. And then on Saturday the 30th of November, in the column The Little Great Heroes, we continue our meditation. Last Saturday we were all struck. I presume if you followed it, you might find it on the Radio Domina Nostra playlist, the catechesis of last Saturday. This little girl dead at 8 years old who became a saint so quickly. Instead, next Saturday we'll talk about the young 12-year-old Abruzzese girl, Ambrosina Berardi, whose beatification cause is underway. Finally, let's get to today's episode, which is quite interesting and takes its cue from what we've been discussing. The title is How the Refractory Christians of France, resisted the false church. So in short, my dear children, the more years pass, it's been 12 years that the throne of Peter has been occupied by an impostor, the more clearly the interpretive horizons and the fronts of and deeper study. First of all, we have the Bergogliani, those who believe that Pope Francis is not only the Pope, but also the greatest Pope in history, a Pope accompanied by God's providence, a Pope who on behalf of these initiatives, these openings, acts on behalf of the Holy Spirit. Then there are the Unicam. They're the dissatisfied ones, frustrated, I'd say, by the constant presence of the so-called Pope Francis. Those who feel in their hearts that Francis isn't the Pope, yet stubbornly go to Mass. always finding 1,001 far-fetched reasons to justify attending Mass and celebrating the sacraments in union with the so-called Pope Francis. So it's a sacramental, liturgical, and above all, an unforgivable dogmatic and theological short circuit. You say it with Pope Francis, playing those familiar word games. Then there are the traditional Sedevacanists, who for ages have been saying that the Church is founded on Peter, that the last Peter was Pius XII, that the Council was a sect, and that you Tiggerazingers were also part of it. They're the ones like Vigano and all those in the constellation, the whole archipelago of traditional Sedevacantists. There are then lately those of the position, I would define it, let's say, confundist. It's an expression I invented, my copyright. Confundist of Father Faré, and perhaps of Cianci. I don't know about Dr. Cianci. I don't know because it's even more difficult for me at this stage. I'm on leave. I'd like to understand with affection and respect where Dr. Cianci is heading. As a secular journalist interested in theology, and free to be so, provided I have the necessary expertise, and above all, as an atheist, or no, not an atheist, but a believer, no, not even a believer, nobody needs to know, but I'm interested in how to resolve the issue. This issue has cropped up, and it's basically a position like this. We'll save the Church. Bergoglio isn't the Pope, he's just an anti-Pope, but we'll save the Church. That we're clever, good and handsome, prepared, we understand politics, we know how to communicate well, we're experts, we're certainly not religious fanatics, and with our support, our human capabilities, because there's no time to pray the rosary and do old-fashioned nonsense, we'll save the Church, because the Church is still the Catholic Church, because the Church, which should understand which one though, where is this, because it's a ghost. At this point, it's a ghost, this so-called true Catholic Church that Bergoglio leads. So these are proposing nothing less than a further front, which we didn't expect, and which only harms the unity of the resistance. But patience, if God permits, there will be a reason. They foresee that the solution is nothing less than a canonical legal type, that is, to work so that no less than the cardinals, and even here it's unclear which ones, when and how, perhaps indefinitely, will wait, will evidently have a life expectancy like Methuselah's, who, as the scriptures say, lived longer than anyone else in the Bible, the man who lived the longest. They'll wait, it's unknown how, for the cardinals to do something to resolve the matter. Here they are, and the comparison, Father Faré is a Confucianist, there's no doubt, because Father Faré is the one who, I don't know what kind of nerve he has to say these things, who says, I'm coming to celebrate Mass for you, or rather, you come to me, but you have to give me your name, surname, email address, who you are, how many of you are coming, etc. I'll tell you where to meet, as if it were some kind of sect. And then they tell us, Mass is public, Mass is a public act. Father Faré, you should know this. You can't do what you're doing, show yourself. But that's not the point of method. The point is the content. He's willing to say Mass, knowing that people know he doesn't mention Bergoglio at Mass, but he still invites everyone, despite this, to attend Mass with Pope Francis. You can't understand a thing there. At last, it's our turn. We haven't slipped once since the start. Don Minutella has been here for 8 years, and that's where you met him 8 years ago. Or am I wrong? Am I wrong? Have you ever seen Don Minutella, despite all the evidence, the struggles, deflect anything? Had a change of heart? Was there perhaps a detour, a meeting with someone? Sadly, that's how these things work. The devil's always busy. Don Minutella has been here for 8 years with a precise direction, which is ours, of the small Catholic remainder. What's this direction? Bergoglio's not Pope, yet he's both not and is. The Pope is placed there by the global powers, by the work of Satan, for the construction with the decisive passage of the false church of darkness foreseen by the prophecies. It seems that, my dear friends, each of you can find your place thanks to the undersigned, who, despite many flaws, has an unparalleled merit, that of being clear, lucid, and transparent in his exposition. Then the television picks it up from everyone, and that is us. Our position is clear, that of the small remnant. Bergoglio is not the Pope. That's it. We concur. That's not the Church, just structures. Monsignor Sheen said it'd still seem Catholic in all aspects. He says everything, but wasn't a mystic. For bread and ham lovers, he wasn't mystical, or was, but in a small, theological way. When a theologian also becomes a mystic, it's extremely dangerous, in the true sense of the word. They become unreachable. A theologian who becomes a mystic, who is a mystic at heart, remains a theologian, is unparalleled. So, Monsignor Fulton Sheen was a theologian, not a mystic. He was a bishop. And he evidently saw in advance what would happen, that is, the formation of a false church, which is what the mystics, in the strict sense of the term, talk about, like the Blessed Caterina Emmerich, who saw it precisely during the time of the two popes. Setting up a false church, a human, devilish construct, nothing spiritual or divine. And then it's also Padre Pio who said sensationally in 1960 to Donna North, and the news is true, Gabriella, it's Satan who has infiltrated the church and will soon come to govern a false church. So our position regarding those we've mentioned should be the clearest. It has a cost though, and that's why so many as they come leave. They leave not because they lose faith in what we say. They leave because this path isn't easy, because it means not being contaminated by Bergoglio's false church. So here's the passage. This is where everyone should have agreed with me. But this doesn't just require logos and nomos, as I said last night. That is, logos. I mean rationality, which also reaches us, nomos. The law, canon law. This requires God's grace. The grace with which 3 shepherd children were invested. Fatima almost announcing a heavenly and supernatural investiture of the little remnant. That is to say, you have to understand that you don't go to Mass with shame, that you mustn't set foot in it for as long as this false church remains in the occupied structures. And since they accuse us of doing crazy things, we've written and said many times that we weren't the first, that before us, at least 2 seasons lived through this, namely Santa Maria, during the time of the anti-Arian Christians, and then in 18th century France. Right, that's what I wanted to mention, the refractory Christians of France. We're not alone, we're not the first. So, we know, we must resist the false church. But what happened here, in France, in the 18th century? Right then, I'll give you something, I'll give you food for thought, that will strike me deeply and encourage me. Do you know that the French Republican Constitution forced all priests, the clergy, high clergy, that is, bishops, and low clergy, priests, parish priests, to sign the Republican Constitution, to swear an oath on it? This constitution, however, was clearly anti-Christian, openly went against the gospel, and above all, provided for a schism from the Roman pontiff. The Pope was approached, and Pope Pius VI, I believe it was the 7th, said that the Constitution shouldn't be signed, that no oath should be sworn, because it was mainly about an oath, not a signature. The clergy shouldn't swear an oath in favor of the Constitution. How did things go? This, you see, is an image of the French Chilean Constitution. How did things go? Dear Flowers, what can you do? The world's always the world. Nothing can be done. Things have gone as they're going today. So it's no surprise that, statistically speaking, a good portion of the high clergy, all the high clergy, that's why I don't expect anything from the cardinals, the high-ranking French bishops, then the priests see the bishops doing it. It's a process of imitation, of imitative behavior. The French bishops, how lovely the sun is. It's quite pale, though. But there's sun here, where we're passing through the lower Ardennes area of Ardennes. I was saying that then the bishops, practically all of them, apart from a very rare exception, swore allegiance to the Constitution, becoming apostates because the Pope had said that at that moment one shouldn't swear allegiance to the Constitution. So they became apostates, who basically imitate the bishops, their superiors, seeing that the bishops have sworn allegiance to the Constitution, in turn the parish priests and the priests for a good 85%, some even say 90%, swore allegiance to the Constitution. That's how things went. So there was a dramatic moment in France, permitted by God, because the trials that God sends are always ultimately necessary to distinguish the saints from the wicked, the elect from the reprobate. I was saying that practically, in a dramatic moment, 90% of the high and low clergy of France were blatantly apostate. Because in defiance of the papal decree stipulating that the clergy should not swear allegiance to the Constitution, as it was anti-Christian, for the sake of their livelihood, to avoid losing their skin or soiling their pants, or perhaps soiling their pants, they ultimately swore allegiance to the Constitution, the civil constitution of the clergy, that's what it's called, which obliged all the clergy to swear allegiance to the state. And in return, listen carefully, pecunia non olet. I remind you of the Iscariot, and then they'll attack me. What can we do? It's reality, harsh facts. The Republic had decreed that all priests who signed the civil constitution of the clergy, and not just those, would be spared persecution and would receive a kind of salary sufficient to live comfortably. That is, in the communes, the town halls in France, the priests had to present themselves, and they did so, defying the Pope's order. They went and signed, swearing their apostasy from the faith, swearing allegiance to a constitution that was the ultimate test, because that meant becoming apostates. Then there was also the salary. You understand where things end up, because there are so many times that they don't care about souls at all. Remember that. Attend. Many priests don't care about souls at all. They care about their salary. They care about the 8 per thousand tax. They care about having to look after families in a broad sense. They care that it's not inherently a bad thing. I've done it myself sometimes. But if that's all you do, you're not a pastor. Anyway, let's get back to us priests, as is happening today with Bergoglio, who asks for fidelity to the devil there in the clerical constitution, civil constitution. They apostatized by swearing allegiance to the Constitution and thus becoming apostates. How'd it go? She went, because the church is guided by the Holy Spirit. So that's what happened, as expected. And that is, the people, like the small remaining population in Italy, the people said no. At a certain point, especially in the countryside of inland France, and particularly in the Vendée, the people said that they didn't want the priests who had signed the Constitution. We priests who swore allegiance to the devil, to Napoleon, to the anti-Christian French Republic, don't want them celebrating the sacraments for us. Question: were the sacraments valid? Certainly, because there, thank God, the game wasn't apostasy from the faith. Inside the church, as Brother Celestine said yesterday, but it was a secular, secularist, worldly imposture. So the church was safe. So, even the sacraments celebrated by those apostate constitutionalist priests were valid, giving us yet another reason to leave. Shame on you. You ought to be ashamed of yourselves. The Christian martyrs will be waiting for you at the gates of heaven. Of the French Republic, who did not sign, swear allegiance to the Constitution, and who resisted. What I'd like to say is that the sacraments were varied, but the people didn't want Mass celebrated by priests who had sworn allegiance to the Constitution. They didn't even want to see those priests they considered traitors, those Judas priests who, for their salary and to live peacefully, had sworn allegiance to the Constitution. Not all, because a significant, yet numerically irrelevant number, you see, the Holy Spirit is always at work. A group of priests throughout France, starting in Paris, decided not to swear an oath to Napoleon's Constitution. To be clear, then, he says that there was one among Celestin Delacroix who didn't show up at the Paris town hall to swear allegiance. Where is it? He's hidden. That's what they were called. Refectory. And then there was another one called Monsieur Enrique Bernasconi. It seems he didn't even show up at the Lyon town hall. So the French police started looking for him, searching high and low. Mr. Enrique, why haven't they signed? Haven't they sworn allegiance? What have they done? Nothing. They were refractory. They decided to remain faithful to the gospel, as priests aren't doing today. You understand what a shame we're experiencing. What a shame, those priests who know that Bergoglio is an apostate, a heretic, a fraud, not the Pope. He's destroying consciences. He's building a false angel, and they're silent, and rewarded with promotions, salaries, and perks. Instead, priests and refractory friars, I don't know if you know this, priests and refractory friars were condemned to death, that is, persecuted. You know, I told you about this last night. No, I didn't say that because, when the largest size is put on someone called Minutella, Monsieur Minutella is considered the refractory leader. So, since I'm the one who didn't say I was going to Ars, I passed by. The holy curate of Ars, as a child, was trained by refractory priests. In my opinion, this is to show you how holiness is imitation and continues through propagation. Of enthusiastic faith, I reckon. If there hadn't been those rebellious priests, we wouldn't have had the holy curé d'Ars. Imagine if all the priests had sworn allegiance to the Constitution for their salary and to avoid trouble. So the Republic gets angry and puts a bounty on the heads of the refractory priests, who have to take off their robes because they're otherwise easily identifiable and dress as peasants. They escape from the large towns and go into the hinterland, the French countryside, which was then and still is today vast tracts of hills and endless countryside, it seems. So, they head for the countryside and celebrate Mass. They go to say the sacraments in the farms and barns. Their loyal followers were already getting together, so in turn, the men pretended to say that they cost a fortune, because refractory priests were sought after. Sometimes they had caught some. They guillotined them, the refractory priests, martyrs. Others got away with it, thanks to a bit of immigration. The young curate of Ars had to resist, and once he was sought by the Republican guards. He hid in a barn under the straw, and one of the soldiers poked his rifle in to see if anyone was there. The holy curate practically recounted how it passed right by him. Just imagine. So the priests refused, and people went to them. I find this wonderful. We'll meet in Milan on December 8th, and then everyone will hush about these vital gatherings. No one can gather thousands of faithful like we are doing. Because you, faithful of the small remnant, those who aren't part of a team, those who aren't affiliated in one way or another, like Father Faré is doing now with his false church, you are the ones who make the difference. You are the Christians who protect the refractory priests, and we are the refractory priests. So, I also wanted to read you a document by Baruel, The History of the Clergy in the French Revolution. Listen, so the story goes like this. So, their clubs talking about the Republicans doubled down on the persecution of Catholics in the provinces, mainly in the parishes, who showed greater attachment to the old faith, informed by intruders. There were spies. There will always be spies, unfortunately, of all those who claim to be theirs. They even went into the homes of the faithful, insulted them, threatened them, and dragged them by force into the constitutional churches. Any idea what happened? So what shall we do? Basically, believers and not just priests, but non-believers too. They paid for it, because the Republican guards would arrive, drag them from their homes, and take them to church. The problem was attending Mass at all costs in the Republican Constitutionalist Church. How's it happening? At all costs to Mass with Bergoglio. And these faithful followers, now the techniques can't be the same, because otherwise they'd be revealed, but they're of another kind, a continuous work of delegitimizing Don Minutella. Continuous. Because they need to bring the faithful back. You see, in Teresa, they were marching them and dragging them by force into the constitutional churches. Listen again about Baruel. This is an interesting document. We'll come back to it. When I said that, it didn't happen. On feast days, when the citizens didn't bother to follow the sworn priests, that is, those faithful who didn't go to Mass, you see, Christmas, Easter, Pentecost, the Assumption, then they watched from afar as the faithful skipped Mass at state churches. So the National Guards would attack them on the road, the countryside, and the cities mobilized to be freed from this violence. These were considered acts of rebellion against the law. Any idea? Actually, it's not that this didn't reach. I mean, if you didn't go to Mass in the constitutional churches, an act of rebellion against the law, not divine law, Republican law. So, in the midst of the divine office, while the refractory priests were celebrating Mass, groups of assassins would often arrive and murder the refractory priests. All this was presented to the assembly as so many battles. If, anywhere, the people refused to pay taxes, because, after all, they also had to pay for the comfortable lives of the priests who had apostatized, then the faithful didn't want to give the money. That's always been the issue. So then they were persecuted and mistreated. It was a constant thing, their own roundups. Continuous sweeps, that's what the author says. We ourselves knew one of these commissioners returning from the front. He was one of those men who could not be accused of favoring Catholic priests. They were those 18th century philosophers who know very little about Christianity and its incomprehensible proofs to believe in its gifts. But in him at least, disbelief was conviction. He told us, "I have seen those good people." He's talking about the resistant people. There is nothing more false than the rumors spread about them. They came before us, tears in their eyes, asking for nothing more. Think about it. A Republican official is saying that the Christians, the refractory priests of the Vendée, were crying when the official arrived because they weren't free to attend Mass, celebrated by the priests they loved, that is, the refractory priests. Wow, did you know? People were crying, begging these Republican officials for the freedom to attend Masses celebrated by priests, not apostates. They asked for nothing else but their priests, and therefore the peace and freedom of worship that the decrees promised to guarantee to all. And this is important testimony from Gensenet and Gallois, who were the two commissioners sent to the departments of Vendée and Sèvres, whom the historian Barwell is talking about. And then, of course, the accusations against the refractory priests and refractory Christians were unbelievable, so they were persecuted, and often the roundups led to outright seditions. Right, that's a bit of how things are. And naturally, things aren't much different today. Today, things aren't much different. Practically, we're in the presence of, I only read you one passage. Naturally, the document is very interesting. God willing, we'll return to it. Today isn't much different, because we're in the presence of a small remainder that doesn't want to hear about aligning itself with the false church. Now, I'd like to say to Father Faré and everyone else who's confused, if you're resistant Christians, They didn't want masses celebrated by apostate priests, even though the sacraments were certainly valid. I say, aren't you ashamed to go to Mass with Bergoglio? Because here we're not talking about Napoleon or Republican officials. We're talking about someone dressed in white, who isn't the Pope, as even you latecomers with Father Farad acknowledge, and who's destroying the Catholic Church. Is it normal, some tell you, to attend Mass with him? You mustn't do it. It's the question before God today. The decisive question is this. You see a picture, or rather a presentation, of priests moving their belongings from a cathedral to get away. The crucial question today is this, my dears. You mustn't set foot in there. And stop being so nostalgic. Oh, Father, but when I die, my aunt's funeral, my grandmother's funeral, but when then I have to receive the Christmas Mass, where do I go? How do I confess? Plant it once and for all. Be strong in your faith. Don't go to Masses in union with Pope Francis. Don't set foot in churches, shrines, places of worship occupied by the false church. Come to our hotels where we meet and pay, because thank God there's a system that's been reliable so far, whereby we do everything according to the law. Come and receive valid sacraments from us, just as Christians used to receive them from refractory priests. No to the impostor, we won't even sniff him. That's Satan's foreman. Attending Mass with Pope Francis is sinful. God turns away. They're apostates, not just Bergoglio. Anyone in union with him, even if they say, I don't like this Pope, if you go to Mass, you're with him. That's it. And indeed, the constitutionalist priests enjoyed life just as the Christian Republican constitutionalists did, just as the vast majority of Christians do together. Yes, they moan all day long, but they've got perks. Do you see Professor Roberto de Matte's Lepanto Association? See, one example, what he told me that I'm crude. God bless him. I thank him. I thank him. I'll kiss his hand. What does this association actually do? It's traditionalist, with bigwigs and barons, the cream of the Roman patriciate, clearly in a position unfavorable to the progressive movement, because it can't be otherwise unless they've lost their minds, always complaining about the heretical course the Catholic Church is now taking, although not in an anti-conciliar compromise position like Viganos, therefore in favor of Wojtyła, Ratzinger, etc. But Bergoglio and Pope, we attend traditional Mass with Pope Francis. Got it? It bothers them here. Issues? Are they hunted? No, we are. We, on the other hand, yes, give just one example, but examples could be multiplied. Think of Gricigliano, a place where people study to become priests. Following the traditionalist Mass, they speak French. There's 19th century, 17th century mannerism, the Ancien Regime. In my opinion, it's a Catholic paradigm now outdated in terms of manners, though its liturgy is another matter. They certainly don't believe Bergoglio is the Pope, but they officially say they should be admitted, and so far they haven't been touched. Dear children, this is reality. Instead, me, twice excommunicated, reduced to a lay state, persecuted, facing criminal proceedings, ghettoized, defamed, humiliated on social media, targeted by the media, newspapers, television, etc. Don Enrico Bernasconi removed from the parish, excommunicated, and reduced to the lay state. Can't you find someone else who doesn't gossip, who doesn't chatter about this? Because the difference is like the French Christians who were resistant, both priests and laity, who said no to the Constitution. Today it's saying no to Bergoglio. As long as there's this system where people say go to Mass because it's valid, but it's in communion with the Antichrist. Because ultimately, whoever goes against the gospel in every era, from Napoleon to Bergoglio, is the Antichrist. Antichrist, in Greek, literally means the one who opposes the gospel. What's the point? Why bother? It's useless. If you go to Mass, as long as I have a false pope, you're offending God. There's only one way to resist the false church, as the subtitle says, to resist the false church, And not just with talk, and not by publishing books, and not by holding symposiums, round tables. It's not enough. What needs saying? And not to attend masses in union with the so-called Pope Francis. Not simply then because he's not the Pope, and therefore there's a canonical problem. Legally speaking, but because he's not the Pope, he's even the head and founder of the Church of Darkness, the one Emmerich, Padre Pio, and Monsignor Fulton Sheen touched upon, the mystical body of the Antichrist. My dear children, do you realize? Pay attention, those of you who are still uncertain, those who have recently left. It was better that they left, because the evidence is here. We must be strong in faith, says the letter to the Beth. Jewish people, you haven't yet resisted to the point of bloodshed in your fight for faith, and that's exactly it. Jesus says, you are the ones who have persevered. The Gospel says the Lord told the apostles, you are the ones who have persevered with me through trials. So this is about those, and these phone calls in October, it was an undergrowth ready to explode, and I was called Joseph Iscariot, shouting, crying like that. But in the end, hold on. The problem was that these people weren't convinced. They wanted to leave their parishes, their structures, their previous ways. And in the end, they did what Lot's wife did, Don Enrico said last Wednesday. She looked back and turned into a pillar of salt. We must press on down this road, because there's no doubt that, like the refractory Christians, with their heroic priests, I haven't had time to look up the list of refractory martyr priests, but just click on Google. It'll give you the names, dates, and how they died, because a couple are many martyrs. They saved French Catholicism. Expensive flowers, here we have to save universal Catholicism. The small remainder is the only solution to the false church of darkness. No standard solutions work here. The little bit left, it's the only solution to the problem of the false church of darkness. Where do I go? I'll give you a brief text. Through this poor sod speaking to you, Dama Nutella, the Madonna has created what the prophecies foretold, nothing less than pontiffs. And it doesn't matter that there are so many defections, so many apostasies, because meanwhile, we always remain in considerable numbers. Evidently, my friends are in crisis, if they say we're dwindling. The numbers show otherwise. What I'd like to say, however, is something else. It doesn't matter whether many or few leave afterwards. It's not because of this that there's betrayal. Actually, we could have confirmation if what we've been saying for years is genuine. That is, it hasn't created another, so we are the uninterrupted continuation of the apostolic faith. Remember that and bear it in mind. Slight shift. The small remainder, which clearly states that Bergoglio is not the Pope, and one doesn't go to Mass with him as St. Athanasius did in the 4th century, is that pastoral, dogmatic Catholic reality that safeguards the Catholic faith. The rest is just boring, the song used to say. No, I didn't say joy, but boredom. There's no alternative. Get it into your heads. There's no alternative. That's the false church in time. With all evidence, it seems it will last a long time. Because I don't foresee this false church ending with Bergoglio. I don't foresee that. We must pray much more evidently. We still pray too little. Pray many rosaries, and with the rosary we will liberate the throne of Peter, and with the rosary the false church will be destroyed. It's given to Our Lady, Don Stefano Gabbi said. We'll talk about it tomorrow evening in Catechesis on the New Pentecost. In a historic message, in my opinion, he spoke of the little remnant that proceeds in suffering, in prayer, and in hope. Here, it's us who do this route of the false church. The only alternative is the small remnant of these priests resistant to Bergoglio, who oppose the false church of darkness and Tav. They're suggesting a path that incidentally the popes from Paul VI to Benedict XVI have announced, that is, in a season where non-Catholic thought seems to have become the dominant and official one. Paul VI in 77 said there would be a small flock that would build the faith. Sorry, I've never said that. That is, I in the sense of us, we are that small flock, and I don't see any others around. There might be others, because I'd like to say that if then, everyone makes their own chapel, their own garden. Moreover, with an attitude of rigor, you understand why, perhaps yes, in relation to the association and Don Minutella. How do they affect that? How do they impact? It needs public resistance. A die-hard resistance to the death, as someone said, let them massacre me. That's it. Right then, my dears, I hope I've been clear today. More than ever, let's ditch any questions and come to Milan. Now we're opening the lines. Call Radio Domina Nostra for this or other topics. I recall, as I noticed in France, I didn't specify, so calls dropped. I know why I've been in touch with people. There are no extra costs. There are no extra costs. You can call without any worries because there are no extra costs here in France. I remind you, Sunday, the 8th of December in Milan. Let's meet up. Come by car, by train, by helicopter, by plane, by scooter, but come and celebrate Our Lady. There'll be this gospel presentation to families.